Walk into any modern furniture store and you are surrounded by stuff that seems to have a built-in expiration date. A bookshelf that sags in 2 years, a table whose veneer peels after one coffee spill, a chair that starts to wobble and creak after just a few seasons. We have come to accept it as normal. We buy, it breaks, we toss it, and we buy again. It is this endless cycle of disposable convenience. But then, you walk into a museum, an old church, or a drafty castle, and in the corner there is a wooden chest, or a table, or a choir stall. It is made of nothing but wood, no chemical gloss, no plastic coating, and it has been sitting there for 800 years. It has survived wars, floods, the rise and fall of empires, and the simple, relentless march of time. It is not rotting, it is not crumbling, it is solid, functional, and honestly still beautiful. So what is going on here? How could a medieval craftsman, with just a handful of iron tools and 12 years of apprenticeship under a guild master, create a piece of furniture that is practically immortal? Meanwhile, our super-advanced technological society produces stuff that is practically designed to fail. They did not have power tools. They did not have chemical preservatives cooked up in a lab or industrial pressure treaters. So, what did they know that we have forgotten? What was their secret? Well, it is not one single magic formula. It is something way more interesting. It is a complete mindset, a lost wisdom that saw wood not as a dead commodity, but as a living material you had to understand and respect. The immortality of their work was not some happy accident. It was the result of a deep, patient collaboration with nature. They were not just carpenters. They were masters of their environment, and they held 4 fundamental secrets that turned simple timber into something that could defy centuries. The central thesis: a partnership with nature. Before we get into the how, we have to get our heads in a totally different space. To a modern mind, preservation means fighting nature. It means sealing wood under a layer of plastic, a brittle shell that tries to keep the world out. It means injecting it with a cocktail of chemicals, like chromated copper arsenate, that is a toxic brew so nasty it was phased out for residential use in 2003 because the arsenic could leach into the soil. We are waging a chemical war against decay, and it is a war we keep losing. Cracks form in our plastic shells, moisture gets trapped underneath, and the rot starts from the inside out, hidden until it is way too late. The medieval craftsmen saw it completely differently. They knew they could never defeat nature, so they decided to partner with it. Their approach was not a battle, it was a science built on centuries of just paying attention. They understood that the things that cause wood to rot, water, oxygen, fungi, insects, were not enemies to be poisoned, but just parts of a natural cycle. The secret to making something last was not to stop the cycle, but to make the wood a terrible, uninviting place for all the little critters that cause decay. This whole philosophy was built on a foundation of patience that is almost unimaginable today. They did not measure projects in weeks or months, but in years, sometimes even decades. Time was not a cost to be cut. It was a critical ingredient, the invisible tool that made the wood stronger with every season. They did not just build furniture, they curated it into existence, guiding it from a living tree to a permanent fixture of their world. This lost wisdom was protected by the guild system. A carpenter's apprenticeship lasted 7 years. 7 years living with a master craftsman, learning not from books but from daily observation and practice. The apprentice would start as young as 14, bound by legal contract to the master, receiving no wages, only food, shelter and knowledge. Then came 3 more years as a journeyman, travelling from workshop to workshop across Europe, refining techniques, learning regional variations, perfecting the craft. Only after a full decade of training could one hope to become a master, and even then, only after creating a masterpiece judged worthy by every master in the guild. It was a system designed not for efficiency, but for perfection. This wisdom really breaks down into 4 big ideas, each a crucial step in the journey from the forest to your floor. And it all starts not with a saw, but with a walk in the woods. It starts with the right tree. The first and most important secret is this: not all wood is created equal. A medieval carpenter would have laughed at the idea of grabbing a generic lumber board from a giant stack at a yard. For them, picking the wood was a precise art. It was the decision that basically determined the fate of the final piece before a single cut was ever made. Their choice was not about what was cheapest, but what was right for the job. The undisputed king of woods, especially for furniture and buildings, was oak, but not just any oak. They looked for old-growth trees that had spent 50 to 100 years, sometimes even centuries, in a dense forest, growing slowly and creating incredibly tight growth rings. This dense, uniform grain was not just pretty, it made the wood far less likely to crack or split, which was essential for the intricate carving and joinery they were famous for. Even more than that, oak had a powerful, built-in defense system. The heartwood, the dense dead core of an old tree, is packed with tannins. We are talking about 8 to 12% tannic acid by weight. Tannic acid is a bitter compound that makes the wood taste awful to insects and actively poisons the fungi that cause rot. They knew this instinctively. They prized the dark, heavy heartwood and would often just discard the lighter, softer sapwood, the living outer layers of the tree that are full of sugars and starches. Sapwood was basically a free buffet for bugs and mold. Here is where modern lumber fails from the very start. Modern forestry cuts trees at 20 to 30 years old to maximize profit and turnover. These young trees are almost entirely sapwood. Mills process the whole log, mixing the vulnerable sapwood right in with the good stuff, introducing a fatal flaw from the very beginning. Every modern lumber board is classified as durability class 5. Not durable because it is mostly sapwood. Medieval oak heartwood, durability class 2. That means 15 to 40 years outdoors and centuries in a protected environment like a house or church. For pieces that needed really delicate carving, like those stunning altarpieces you still see in European cathedrals, they turned to a different tree, lindenwood, also called lime. Lindenwood is not as tough as oak, but it has something just as valuable: incredible dimensional stability. It has a superfine uniform grain that means it barely shrinks or swells with changes in humidity. If you are carving a face, one crack could ruin months of work, so this stability was everything. But what wood they chose was only half the secret. The other half was when they cut it down. They almost exclusively felled their timber in the dead of winter, typically between December and February. It was a rule passed down for generations, traditionally marked by the waning moon, just before the new moon. Medieval timber was cut during these specific periods. Whether the moon itself influenced the wood, or whether it simply marked the perfect window when trees were deepest in dormancy, is still debated by scientists today. What we do know is that recent research from Switzerland's ETH Zurich found timber cut during these periods showed 5 to 7% better durability in weathering tests, with denser wood that resisted fungal attack more effectively. In winter, a tree is dormant. Its sap, which is just sugar water, has retreated deep into the roots. Harvesting wood in winter meant the timber was already low in the nutrients that fungi and insects need to survive. A tree cut in spring, bursting with sap, was a ticking time bomb of decay. The medieval carpenter did not need to understand why. 2,000 years of observation, passed down through guild traditions documented by Julius Caesar, Pliny the Elder, and countless medieval manuscripts, told them when, and the results speak for themselves. By working with the forest's natural cycles, they started the preservation process before the wood even got to the workshop. It was a profound act of ecological wisdom that modern year-round logging has completely abandoned. The slow magic of seasoning. Once they had the perfect winter-felled log, the medieval craftsman's most powerful tool came into play: patience. Using fresh green wood for furniture was just unthinkable. A fresh log is saturated with water, sometimes more than half its weight. Building with it would be self-sabotage. As the water leaves, the wood shrinks, twists, and warps. A table would collapse, a chest would split wide open. The wood had to be seasoned, and their method was a masterclass in letting nature do the work. The most common technique was air drying. The logs were brought to a seasoning shed, covered to keep rain off, but open on the sides for airflow. They were stacked on stones to keep them off the damp ground, with thin sticks called stickers placed between each layer so air could circulate around every single surface. And then they waited for years. A 1-inch thick oak board might take a year to season. A massive beam for a cathedral roof might sit there for a decade. Building contracts from the 14th century show that clients were expected to provide the timber years in advance. During this long, slow process, the moisture evaporated gradually and evenly. The wood fibers condensed, the resins hardened, and the internal stresses were gently relieved. The wood did not just dry, it settled. It found its final, stable form. This is the polar opposite of modern kiln drying, where we force wood to dry in days inside giant ovens. That violent, rapid process creates brittle wood and locks in huge stresses. It is like baking a cake at double the temperature for half the time. The outside looks done, but the inside is a gooey mess. But air drying was not their only trick. For certain jobs, they used a much more mysterious method: water seasoning. It sounds completely insane, right? To preserve wood from moisture, you first sink it in water. Logs were often chained together and left at the bottom of a river or a pond for months, sometimes years. The 15th century architect Leon Battista Alberti wrote about this, noting that it made the wood more stable and easier to work. They might not have known the microbiology, but their observations were spot on. The running water slowly washed away the starches and sugars in the sap, the main food source for fungi and wood-boring insects. They were basically starving the enemy before the battle even began. When the log was finally pulled out, it was left with a purer cellulose structure that was way less attractive to pests. The wood also emerged darker and denser, with enhanced natural resistance. The wooden piles that have held up the city of Venice for centuries are a testament to this technique. The water, by blocking oxygen, prevents decay, while cleaning the wood from the inside out. After its long bath, the timber was then air-dried, resulting in wood that was even harder and more rot-resistant. Nature's armor, with wood that was perfectly chosen and patiently seasoned. The craftsmen moved to the third stage, creating a protective shield. But their idea of a shield was totally different from ours. Modern finishes like polyurethane are surface coatings. They form a thin plastic film over the wood. The problem is that barrier is imperfect. It scratches, it cracks, and when it fails, it traps moisture underneath, creating a perfect greenhouse for mold. The medieval approach was the opposite. It was not about sealing the surface. It was about fortifying the wood from within. Their treatments were penetrating finishes designed to soak deep into the fibers and become part of the wood itself. One of the most dramatic techniques was a trial by fire. Craftsmen would use controlled charring, lightly scorching the surface of the wood. This principle of fire-hardening wood was known across medieval Europe, and we see it perfected today in the Japanese technique of shosugi-ban. The fire burns away the soft, sugary outer fibers, leaving a sterile layer of carbon. This char is naturally resistant to water, tastes awful to insects, and is even a bit fire-resistant because it has already burned. After charring, or sometimes instead of it, came preservative oils and resins. The king of these was pine tar. This stuff was a huge industry, especially for societies like the Vikings. The tar, a thick black substance rendered from pine stumps, was heated up and rubbed onto the wood. The heat helped the tar penetrate deep into the pores, where its natural compounds acted as a poison to fungi and a barrier to insects. But their real genius was in combining ingredients. One of the most powerful lost formulas was a three-part mixture. First was pine tar, for its antifungal properties. This was often mixed with boiled linseed oil. Linseed oil soaks deep into the wood, but its real magic is that it hardens when exposed to air. This oil contains linolenic acid, which polymerizes when exposed to oxygen, transforming from liquid to solid within the wood fibers themselves. It did not just coat the fibers, it solidified within them, adding strength and locking the pine tar in place. The final ingredient was often beeswax. The wax provided a renewable, water-repellent barrier on the surface, but it was still microporous, allowing the wood to breathe. This three-part system, a fungicide carried by a hardening oil, sealed with a breathable wax, was a work of chemical genius, achieved with all natural materials. In other regions, craftsmen adapted. Animal fats were common, sometimes mixed with charcoal dust or alkaline wood ash to create what you could call a medieval superfat. There is even some evidence that for certain applications, wood was soaked in vinegar to kill any latent mold spores before being sealed with oil, creating another durable defense. It is believed that some monastery furniture, treated with similar methods, has survived over 400 years of continuous use. If you are finding value in these lost techniques that modern science is only now beginning to understand, a quick like on this video helps us reach more people who care about craftsmanship and durability. We genuinely appreciate you being here. The three ingredients at the heart of their most powerful formula each served a distinct purpose. Together, they created something that no single ingredient could achieve alone. A complete defense system that has preserved wood for 800 years. Let's examine each component, because what the lumber industry sells you today is a cheap imitation of the real thing. And understanding why matters if you want wood that actually lasts. Before mixing begins, let's take a closer look at the 3 key ingredients. Understanding why they work is the first step. This is not just a recipe. It is a formulation based on centuries of trial and error. First, the backbone of the formula, pine tar. Real pine tar is liquid gold for wood. It is made by distilling the resin from pine stumps and roots, where it is most concentrated. For centuries, this was the king of marine wood preservation. Pine tar, also called Stockholm tar, was Sweden's largest export from 1648 to the early 20th century. It was essential to naval and merchant shipping concerns all over the world. When you smell real pine tar, it has an incredibly potent, smoky, campfire-like aroma. That smell tells you it is full of powerful organic compounds. It works on multiple levels. It is profoundly hydrophobic, so it repels water. But the real magic is that it is naturally antiseptic and fungicidal. The same compounds that protect a living pine tree get concentrated in the tar. When applied to wood, it makes it an awful place for the fungi that cause rot and the insects that want to eat it. It is our heavy-duty protector. Second, the heart of the mixture, boiled linseed oil. If pine tar is the shield, boiled linseed oil is the soul. Its key property is its ability to polymerize or cure. When applied to wood, the wood just drinks it in. It travels deep into the porous structure. Then, over days, it reacts with oxygen and hardens from a liquid into a solid, resilient substance inside the wood itself. This is what gives the finished piece its inner glow and a huge measure of its durability. Then, over days, it reacts with oxygen and hardens from a liquid into a solid, resilient substance inside the wood itself. This is what gives the finished piece its inner glow and a huge measure of its durability. But here is something the industry does not want you to know. The boiled linseed oil sold at big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's is not actually boiled. They sell raw linseed oil with cheap metallic oxidizers added to speed up drying. It is labeled as boiled, but no boiling ever took place. The medieval masters really boiled the oil, a completely different process that creates a superior product. True boiled linseed oil can be found from Swedish manufacturers like Olbeck and Ottosson, who still do it the traditional way. It is important to use boiled linseed oil, not raw. Raw linseed oil can take months to cure, if it ever does, leaving a sticky mess. The boiled version contains additives that dramatically speed up that curing process, making it practical. And third, the final seal, beeswax. Beeswax is one of nature's most perfect materials. To make it usable as a wood finish, it is dissolved in a solvent. We will be using turpentine, which is itself derived from pine resin, making it a perfect partner. Once it is a soft paste, the beeswax functions as the final armor. After the pine tar and linseed oil do their deep penetrating work, the beeswax is buffed over the top. It fills any remaining microscopic pores and leaves behind a thin, tough, waxy film. This film is highly water resistant. Water just beads up and rolls off. It also gives the wood a beautiful low luster sheen that feels wonderful to the touch. It is the perfect final seal on the system. Together, these 3 create a synergy that is far more powerful than any one of them alone. The linseed oil carries the pine tar deep into the wood. It then hardens, locking the pine tar in place. Finally, the beeswax provides a renewable surface barrier that repels water. It is a complete, multi-layered defense system created entirely from natural, time-tested materials. Intelligent joinery and gentle living. The final secret has less to do with how the wood was treated and more with how it was assembled and where it lived. Smart construction and the right environment were the unseen guardians of this furniture. First, the construction itself was a form of preservation. Medieval joiners were masters of the mortise and tenon joint. This is where a peg on one piece of wood fits into a hole on another. But they did not stop there. They used a technique so clever that many modern woodworkers have forgotten it exists: drawboring. Here is how it worked. The craftsman would drill a hole straight through the mortise. Then, critically, he would drill the corresponding hole in the tenon slightly offset, just 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch closer to the shoulder. When a tapered wooden peg was driven through these misaligned holes, something remarkable happened. The wood compressed, the peg bent slightly inside the joint, and as it did, it pulled the tenon deeper into the mortise with tremendous force, clamping the shoulder tight against the adjoining piece. This was not temporary, it was permanent. The peg remained under constant tension, holding everything together even without glue. Medieval furniture often used this technique alone, no adhesive at all, and the joints grew tighter over the centuries as the wood settled and aged. Modern tests have shown that drawbored joints can remain solid even when the fit is somewhat sloppy. The mechanical interlock compensates for imperfections. It is self-correcting joinery, brilliant in its simplicity, and it is the reason an 800-year-old chest can still be lifted by its handles without falling apart. Some craftsmen even used the drying process to their advantage, fitting a dry tenon into a slightly greener mortise. As the mortise dried and shrank, it clamped down on the tenon, creating a joint that literally got stronger over time. Modern furniture, held rigid with glue and screws, fights the wood's natural seasonal movement until something, the glue or the wood itself, cracks under the pressure. Second, the environment played a huge role. A medieval castle or a stone cathedral, with its thick walls and lack of central heating, was a remarkably stable place. Temperatures and humidity changed slowly, seasonally, not drastically from hour to hour, like in our homes. The punishing cycle of a furnace blasting dry heat in winter, followed by an air conditioner in summer, is incredibly harsh on wood. The stable, cool conditions of a medieval hall were far gentler. Finally, there was a culture of care that we have completely lost. Furniture was rare and valuable. A good chest was a major family asset, passed down through generations. It was an heirloom, not a disposable good. This meant it was cared for. Periodically rubbing it down with wax was not just cleaning, it was maintenance. It renewed the protective layer and kept the wood from drying out. Any small issue could be spotted and fixed immediately. The furniture was not just used, it was tended to. Rediscovering these methods is not just a history lesson, it is a treasure map. It points toward a more sustainable and durable way of making things, a way that partners with nature instead of fighting it. Honestly, it feels more relevant today than ever. If you are as fascinated by this lost wisdom as we are, and you believe that craftsmanship and durability are things worth reviving, then subscribe to our channel. We explore forgotten techniques, ancient technology, and the time-tested secrets that modern science is only now beginning to truly understand. Join us as we keep uncovering the genius of the past. So, why does an 800-year-old chest stay solid while a modern bookshelf falls apart? The answer is not one thing. It is everything. It is the result of a forgotten philosophy. The numbers tell the story. Oak heartwood properly selected and seasoned, 40 years outdoors, centuries indoors. Modern particle board, 3 to 5 years before catastrophic failure. Medieval apprenticeship, 12 years of rigorous training under guild masters. Modern furniture assembly, 30 minutes with an Allen wrench and a prayer. We did not lose these techniques because they stopped working. We lost them because speed became more valuable than permanence. It started with the wisdom of selection, choosing slow-grown, winter-felled heartwood that was already packed with nature's own defenses. It continued with the art of patience, letting that wood season for years, in the air or under the water, until it reached a state of perfect stability. It was then armed with nature's own armor, not a plastic shell, but a deep penetrating defense of fire, tar, oils, and waxes. And finally, it was joined with intelligent engineering, drawbored mortise, and tenon joints that grew stronger with time, designed to move with the wood rather than against it, and sustained by a gentle, stable environment and a culture that valued care over convenience. This was a single, unbroken chain of knowledge where every step reinforced the others. The medieval craftsmen understood that the spirit of the tree still lingered in the timber, and to make it last, you had to honor that spirit. What we have really lost is not just a set of techniques, we have lost a mindset. We have traded the deep knowledge of the craftsman for the brute force efficiency of the factory. We have traded the patience that creates heirlooms for the speed that feeds a cycle of consumption. When you touch a piece of 800-year-old furniture, you are not just touching wood, you are touching a different relationship with time itself. You are feeling the physical proof of a culture that built things for their grandchildren's grandchildren, a world where the highest value was not placed on what was new, but on what could endure. And in our world of disposable goods, that is perhaps the most powerful secret of all.